Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry, and today we have my Week 9 power rankings where I'm going to rank all 32 teams based on where I think they rank. We're going to go over the wins in the most recent weeks. Yes, there will be some recency bias to the rankings, but it'll also reflect how the teams have done earlier on in the season and their strength of schedule so far. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Still on a road to 500 subscribers, so let's keep that going. And let's get right into the team that has spent a lot of time at the 32 spot, the Carolina Panthers. They don't move. They were at 32 for, I think, the first 3 or 4 until they got their win. When they got their win and Andy Dalton came in, oh, wait a second, maybe they'll get out of the 30s. And I don't even think they ever did, but they're stuck at 32 again. Really bad loss, honestly. Just another one to the Broncos in this one. So they stay at 32, and Bryce Young's probably going to start again. So it's not looking good for the Panthers at 1-7. Worst record, worst point differential by a country mile. Points per game, yards, all the stats, like it's not good. They're at 32. Next, we have the Titans. Horrible loss to the Detroit Lions. That was just embarrassing, really. The Titans looked like they had a pretty good defense, and even with losing 52-14, you see they stay at first in yards per game. And what's funny is because they've been turning the ball over at a high rate, so the other team hasn't really had to gain a lot of yards. And in certain games where they're playing, bad teams, or like they had week 1, Caleb Williams only threw for like 80 something yards or whatever. So, or week 2 was it, whatever that week was. So, good in the yards per game category, but absolute dog shit in every other category. And, near worth, being at 31. We still have Will Levis pictured right there. Not sure if he's the future with Mason Rudolph coming in, but the Titans very clearly at 31 at 1-6 and one of the worst teams in the league. Next, we have the Vegas Raiders, who moved back. Obviously, they kind of stock dropped a little bit last week, especially, when we lost, Devontae Adams. He goes to the Jets. That definitely hurt. A lot of other problems, not really knowing who their quarterback is. And, Max Crosby showing he's angry, kind of frustrated with Antonio Pierce on the sideline, but still saying, he's a Raider for life or whatever. And it's just there isn't really much upside. Zamir White didn't really look good when he was healthy. Alexander Madison's been okay, but just the offense in general can't really get much going, and puts their defense in a tough spot. I don't necessarily think their defense is horrible. I think they have a good pair of cornerbacks, and then you have, Max Crosby, obviously Christian Wilkins injured. So you got a lot of upside there. I like Bob Spillane, Robert Spillane, great linebacker too. So a lot of injuries though, a lot of injuries on the team, and a lot of not knowing what's going on, not really having any highlight receiver anymore. Brock Bowers has kind of been the main focus of the offense. So the Vegas Raiders at 2-6 are our lowest 2-win team at 30. Next, we have the Miami Dolphins, who almost get a win over the Cardinals, but don't end up getting it. And it's like they probably would have moved up from 28. But when you have a dysfunctional loss like that, and I know the Cardinals lead their division, but I don't think the Cardinals are a very good football team this year. They are only 4-4. And I think that kind of goes to show that, the Miami Dolphins showed promise, so that's why they didn't move back too far. But they just looked completely inept on offense, and been okay. They've been actually pretty decent on defense. But it's really been a tough assignment for their defense with how little their offense was on the field. So not necessarily as much in this last week, but you got to win those close games. And at 2-5 now, it's not looking good for the Dolphins. They just look better as far as like the offense goes when Tua comes back. Definitely looks like they can put it together, but because they don't get the win, it's tough to move them up, because they're going to have to actually put everything together and win for me to move them up in the power rankings. So they sit at 29 at 2-5. That's right behind the Cleveland Browns, who look really promising in a win over the Ravens, and just a kind of a great game for Jameis Winston. Kind of everything coming together for the Browns, where I know, maybe overreacting a little bit to this week, but it was just showing how the offense could function with Nick Chubb back and a, somewhat decent quarterback in Jameis Winston there. So I thought they looked good, and The bottom portion of my list is usually kind of reserved for teams that just can't seem to put it together on offense or defense, and that's kind of where they were. And the Browns kind of snuck out of that category last week with doing a good job of containing Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Although they still had good games, it was just a better containment, and situationally, it was just a better job in my opinion. So I think with that and with the offense looking like they can actually move the ball down the field, Cedric Tillman getting involved heavily there too, with Jameis Winston. So I liked what the Browns did. I don't see them, they're not going to shoot up the list and do anything crazy, but it definitely worth moving up a couple spots, and that's why they move up 3 to 28 at 2-6. Next, we have the New York Giants, 27. Honestly, Giants not great week for the Giants again, losing to the Steelers. I think they played it fairly close, and it's been kind of the same thing every week. For what I've been saying is they allow the other team to score usually around 20 points, little over, and then they can never score 20 points. And that just seems to be like, obviously, the Eagles 2 weeks ago was kind of the exception to the rule there, but the Giants defense continues to play well. Not great in this game. Obviously, would have liked to contain Russell Wilson and Najee Harris and George Pickens. Like to contain all them a little bit better, but their offense just can't move the ball well enough to really win the game. Maybe enough to stay in the game with how close some of these games have been. And the New York Giants move back 2 spots to 27 at 2-6 behind the 26 New York Jets. They move back 2 spots as well. Also 2-6. Aaron Rodgers is there. Devontae Adams comes in, still doesn't look very good. So they'll have to see if they can do it against the Texans. I don't see it. I think right now they're the favorite to win against the Texans, which just seems out of line, but sometimes the books know better. But yeah, at 2-6, the Jets end up at 26. Just not being able to do very well on offense. Defense had done well, and then Robert Saleh leaves, and the defense really hasn't been as good as they were early on, and just so many mistakes on offense as far as penalties or just not being able to block on the offensive line primarily. Dealt with a lot of injuries as well. Few injuries, like I think they're like one or both of their tackles are out. They have a guard that's out. So dealing with a lot of issues there, but that is, if it's a consistent thing, it is going to be a reason that they're not doing as well and that they're lower on my list. So they are pretty low at 26, 2-6, 2 spots back, right behind the New Orleans Saints, who doesn't seem like there's much hope for them. It seems like Derek Carr might be playing next week, so maybe there's some upside there. But they had their first 2 weeks where they just played like a completely different team, and they've lost 6 straight, and it's been a very disappointing season for Saints fans, especially with how exciting week 1 was and how great all that was going. So week 1 and 2, really, with their scoring 40 points in each, and it was just it's crazy to see the fall off of the Saints. But maybe there's some upside there, and maybe they can do a little better. But 2-6 was just not on my bingo card after the first 2 weeks. So Saints move back 2 spots as well to 25, right behind the New England Patriots. Now you can say, Jerry, why are the Patriots moving up? Well, they beat the Jets, which we just talked about how the Jets weren't very good. And I do typically, if the teams are already close in the power rankings and one team beats another, it's likely that that team's going to move ahead. It's part of the reason the Patriots win here. And I still think that the Jets have a good defense. So I think it is impressive. And I think that with the Patriots offense starting to come together, slowly but surely for sure, I think it's kind of come down to if they can run the ball well. If Ramondre Stevenson can get the ball, they can run well. Drake May can use his legs, when he's healthy, move around, and they can get the ball moving down the field. They've done pretty well. So I think with the offense showing upside and the defense, they honestly didn't play great for the standard that the Jets have been playing this year. But you also have to remember the Jets have dealt with a lot of turnovers and stuff. So scoring 23 points or whatever is not very impressive. So I'm taking I'm taking them at 24. I think maybe a little high. We'll talk about where everybody's ranked. We'll do the big picture thing at the end. but I've got the Patriots at 24, right behind the Jacksonville Jaguars, who also move up 3 spots, kind of been side by side there. They're 2-6, and it's really because, typically teams don't move this much when they lose, but after a win the previous week, and then this last week, they play within 3 against the Packers, and it comes down to a game-winning field goal. I think that was very impressive. So I think it's worthy of moving them up, and I think the Jaguars almost looked like, to me, they looked like a better football team in this game than the Patriots versus the Jets. So moved them up 3 spots. Again, pretty big mover, probably the biggest mover for losing a game. But again, it's a top 10 team of mine, spoiler alert, in the Packers. And they're moving up 3 spots just because of how close that game was. They could have won this game in overtime. Packers missed that field goal, or they shut them down, or anything like that. So I think worthy of moving up. Jaguars looking better, not great. It might even be tough for them to get into the 20s, to be honest, at this point. But I've got them at 23 at 2-6, right behind the Colts, who are the lowest 4-4 team. It sounds like Anthony So Anthony Richardson is officially benched, and I think that's huge news for the Colts. Which, good or bad, you could look at it as maybe the way I sometimes think of the Bears, being a Bears fan, is like, I never thought that we were going to win the Super Bowl this season, so get all your mistakes out now. But the Colts are in a position where they actually could, when Joe Flacco's in there, they look like they could make a run. I believe Joe Flacco still has the highest passer rating since he came back and, subbed in last year. So Joe Flacco's just been on a heater when he's playing, and I think if he gets another opportunity with a healthy Jonathan Taylor and, all the weapons that are there, it's kind of underrated. Josh Downs, Alex Pierce, Michael Pittman. So a lot of weapons over there and a lot of upside on the offense when Joe Flacco's in. So they move back in this one in a pretty ugly loss, honestly, to the Texans. Obviously, another close one where they could have held them off and could have gotten the win, but the Texans haven't really looked super special this year anyway either. So I have the Colts move back. It is a loss. They probably sit right around the same if they win, but they move back in a loss in a game you got to win against the Texans there. So they move back to 22, right behind the Cowboys, who have stunk. The Cowboys have been absolute dog shit this year. There's really no other way to describe it than stink or stunk. The Cowboys, they lose to the 49ers, which a close game this week, but I think the other problem comes in is the 49ers haven't really looked great this year, and the Cowboys, they get CeeDee Lamb involved and Jake Ferguson, but their defense has really been underwhelming, and I know there's been injuries, specifically Micah Parsons. You got some important DBs out as well, so I can understand that, but they just all around have looked like a different football team, to be honest. So I move them back 3 spots, another maybe a little extreme moving them back, but it was in a loss, you'd say in a loss to the 49ers, but again, 49ers are 4-4 this year, so they aren't anything super special, but the Cowboys continue to play really not great football. I think they have good opportunity in this next week here with the Falcons having the worst pass rush in the league at only 6 sacks 9 weeks in. So I think there's a possibility for them to move up next week if they can beat the Falcons, but they'll have to do it. That's the main important part. They might not be able to stop Bijan Robinson, and they might continue to move back. So we'll see. But right now they're at 21, right behind the Los Angeles Rams, who get a massive win over the Vikings. You'd say, oh, maybe you didn't move them up enough. But they held the Vikings, who's had a powerful offense. Not really many injuries there. Obviously, unfortunately, they lose Christian Darrisaw, which definitely affected them in this game. I believe it was pretty early on, if I remember correctly, too. Second quarter, I think. So definitely a big loss for the Vikings there. But the Rams capitalized and were able to play great football. Honestly, you get Cooper Kupp, or you get Puka Nacua back, rather. Excuse me. And Kyron Williams still playing great football. So I think Rams show a lot of upside, especially in a division that hasn't been good. You look at the top team in the division is the Cardinals at 4-4, and then the 49ers and the Seahawks are also 4-4. So they win a couple division games, and they're not really that far out of it. So I've got the Rams at 20, moving up 2 spots and with potential to move up in the future if they can stay healthy. But that's right behind the Cincinnati Bengals, who, really bad loss over the Eagles. I talked this year about how the Eagles, I think their offense and their defense had been kind of underwhelming. And that's really just 2 years in comparison. There's kind of a high standard for the Eagles with how well they've played in years past. And I thought it was down in this game. Those Eagles showed that they proved me wrong there, at least from what I was talking about, if we're going to narrow it down to a game or two. But they get a big win over the Bengals in a game where the Bengals fail to produce offense very well and show that they're just a liability on defense, not really being able to stop much of anything, where the Eagles were able to, run the ball often and drive down the field and have Jalen Hurts push into the end zone. So rough time for the Bengals. They do move up. Oddly enough, it's really more just because of the teams that moved back. You look at, not a great game from the Bengals. You look at the teams behind them. They get the Rams. Like I said, doesn't affect it. And the Cowboys. Cowboys had to move back, in my opinion. And then you'll see from the teams ahead of them here, it's kind of why they're ranked where they're ranked. I'd still, we're reading it now. Maybe you could put the Bengals ahead of the Rams. I'd be okay with, or I'm sorry, Bengals behind the Rams. I'd be okay with that. But I've got them at 19, 3-5, right behind the Seattle Seahawks, who I think we'd agree that, the Bengals need to be behind the Seahawks, even though the Seahawks have looked really bad. They had a really strong start. It was 3-0 and then 3-3 and 4-3, and then they get another loss in this one. And this was a disgusting loss to the Bengals where they couldn't really produce any offense, which had been kind of their upside there, where, Geno Smith's been throwing the ball more than any quarterback in the league, and Kenneth Walker's been a great running back this year, and they just kind of fall flat on their face and let the Bills kind of smack them around. So I have them moving back. One of our biggest movers, moving back 4 spots at a very average team in general. If you look at their offensive and defensive point per game, right in the middle, 4-4, almost dead nuts even at the point differential. So just kind of mid, and they're represented in that being at the 18 spot, right behind the Cardinals, who don't move in a week where they get a win. It's just because it was a win over the Dolphins, who have been dog shit this year. It's an exciting win. You'll look at the teams ahead of them and go, yeah, maybe you can't really put them ahead of anybody that moved up. So that's why they end up kind of where they're at. But it is a win, again, over the Dolphins, but we don't really know what that Dolphins team was yet. That was the first game back with Tua. Tyreek Hill really didn't get involved very much, and it didn't look like the same Dolphins still. Definitely looked better than the dog shit Dolphins with their backups, but still didn't look like the same Dolphins, so I can't really judge how big of a win this was yet, and it didn't seem great. Another kind of mid-team, especially you look at the statistics here and how they've played. So I've got the Cardinals at 17. Right behind the Los Angeles Chargers, who I do have, moving up. They get a win over the Saints, who Saints really haven't been impressive whatsoever. So it's not a super astounding win, but against those bad teams, you do have to get those large margin victories, in my opinion. And when you do that, it does help your case. So with, the Cardinals just barely got a win over the Dolphins, who have not been good. Chargers get a massive win over the Saints, who have also not been good. Just, in my opinion, makes it right to put them ahead, which they are. So they're ahead at 16, at 4-3 so far. Pretty decent year for Jim Harbaugh, and a big win for the whole team. Next, we have the Bears, though, at 15, move back 2 spots, and a painful loss that, I'm going to just say is the reason my internet went out. Because I didn't have internet, and that's why this video is really late. It was recorded, started. I'm going to say it's the reason that my internet is out. This is being recorded on a Thursday, and it was, it was out, and that's why I wasn't able to get a few of the videos out. But I think all of Chicago probably just shut down from this horrible loss, and just a massive across the board coaching issue. And was already talking about firing Matt Eberflus, which I don't think it would be a good idea to fire your head coach when your quarterback's in a rookie year and your offensive coordinator is in his first year. And so mid-season, I'm saying, because it's not like we're going to elevate Shane Waldron. You're probably having to elevate a DC, which I don't think that he'd be ready for that either, because the DC was just a defensive line coach. And from what I've heard, a good defensive line coach. Defensive line's been great, but we can't be firing the coach midseason with a rookie quarterback. Can't be doing that. I understand that there's coaching issues. I actually didn't mind the Doug Kramer fullback handoff. A lot of people hated it. I think if it goes in, you love it. And I think it was a nice extra little play in the book where, every time he had been used as a blocker. And why not hand it to him? Now, part of that reason for the fumble there was Caleb Williams running backwards as he's handing it off. You kind of have to turn, stop, and then just hand it to him. You don't have to fly past him. And that's what happened. So I think it was an execution issue there. I don't think that was a bad call. I do think most of Shane Waldron's play calling has been awful and dog shit, though, with most of it being there's not often quick routes down the field. Like, I don't see many slants that are run. I'm sure they are run sometimes. You just can't see them. But I don't need to get too far into this. Obviously, I'm a Bears fan, so I'm pissed about the result of that game. But they moved back 2 spots, rightfully so, in just a loss that you can't have. Like, they played like dog shit the whole game, put together 2 good offensive drives in the fourth quarter. Luckily, their defense held them in enough to keep them in the game, and then they blow it on a Hail Mary per Tyreek Stevenson, per coaching, nobody being no tall people being there for a Hail Mary. So just really, really rough for the Bears here. And they move back 2 spots right behind the Denver Broncos, who move up pretty good here, move up 2 spots. This is a team where I've been talking about how good their defense has been all year. And then once Bo Nix starts putting it together, granted not against a very good team this week, I think that it goes to show that they're getting better. They're still improving. A win over the Panthers isn't really that impressive, but you're seeing positive things out of Bo Nix. So early on, he was turning the ball over a lot, and he's definitely gotten better at that. I'm not going to say he's fixed that issue, but it's getting to a point where with a team like the Broncos, where you kind of have your good defense set and your offense just kind of needs to do it up. They're looking better, and that's why they end up in the top half at 5-3, and then second, moving up 2 spots to 14 behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another one of our biggest movers backwards this week. Just another loss to the Falcons. Divisional game, need to win it, and a lot of injuries. Obviously, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans out, Kate Otten gets heavily involved, and then same with Rachaad White, and it wasn't enough. So I think their offense actually is still playing well, but they're showing that they're kind of a liability on defense, and they lose this one pretty poor fashion too over the Falcons. So they move back 4 spots for me, a big mover, kind of because they were kind of a fraudulent top 10 pick of mine for a little too long. So that's why they are a bigger mover. I think, it was still a close game in the end, not, I guess towards the end, it was just where it was close, but they kind of stayed in it. It just wasn't enough, and a rough sight for the Buccaneers, especially hot start. And now they're just kind of iffy. They just seem like, oh, maybe we'll play this week. And again, we know the injuries are a big part of it, but they're going to need to play better, and they're going to need to win those important divisional games. So they move back 4 spots at 4-4, and at 13, right behind the Atlanta Falcons, of course, who, they just beat them. So this is another case where, like, they were close enough, makes sense to move Buccaneers back, move Falcons up. That's what we did. They're at 5-3. They move up 3 spots, so pretty big move. But again, a divisional game, very important divisional game to take. I believe that they're leading the division now. So with that being said, it just makes sense for them to move up. Not a top 10 team still, so a good team, but not great. That's kind of where they're represented at 12. I think need to make sure that they're staying involved in that run game with Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and everything that's been working there. And then they need to figure out their pass rush situation. I would say with how their record is, I think it'd be worth trading for one. I haven't seen any rumors about that, but with the trade deadline being on Tuesday, to me, it would make a lot of sense because that's one of their biggest flaws. So I got the Falcons at 12, moving up 3 spots, pretty big mover up at 5-3. But that is where they sit for me, right behind the Pittsburgh Steelers, who you could say, Jerry, how do you have a 6-2 team at 11? Because you'll see the top 5 and you'll go, there's people with maybe they have worse records at 11 or at in the top 5. And it's because if you look at the teams that the Steelers have played, you'd have to make an argument for who their bigger win is between the Broncos and the Falcons. And that was an early Broncos. And then, obviously you have the Falcons, but like they just beat the Giants last week. So they move up kind of because, honestly, it's really because the Buccaneers moved back. I think if with their 2 big wins last week, though, the Steelers do definitely have opportunity to move up. I believe they play the Ravens this week, and then I think the following week, I think they have another big game against a better team that would be actually showing of like, oh yeah, maybe they are a good football team. So I've got the Steelers. They only move up 1 spot, but their offense is looking really promising, and their defense has played well all year. So I've got them at 11 and at 6-2. Right behind the Philadelphia Eagles, who do breach into the top 10. I said they needed to get big wins over bad teams, and they've done it 2 weeks in a row. Big win, 28-3 over the Giants, and then 37-17 over the Bengals. And honestly, they've looked better on offense and defense. The only thing that like makes me not want to move them up higher is they're still not good teams. So yeah, you beat them by a large margin. So I think it's unfortunately for them in my power rankings, before they're going to move up much higher, they're probably going to have to play against, some really good teams and beat them. So they kind of stick at 10, kind of stuck around that, fringe top 10 spot where the Steelers are, and for the reason of the Steelers. So they're at 5-2 though. Excuse me. And at number 10, right behind the San Francisco 49ers, who also move up. Win over the Cowboys, not super impressive. I know it'd be easy to make a case probably to move the Eagles ahead of them, but I just think 49ers, I still like, I don't know if it's false hope, just thinking, yeah, the 49ers are supposed to be a great football team, but they've struggled, and there's no getting around that. So I think I've got them at 9, but they're definitely, especially only being 4-4, definitely seem like they could be moving back, and I think it'd be easy for a team like the Steelers or the Eagles to jump them, especially if they have another loss soon. So I've got the 49ers at 9 at 4-4. Look at that offense though, too. 8th in points per game, 2nd in yards per game, 17th. And so their defense, I mean, you can even tell just from the games that they play. You don't have to look at those numbers aren't fully telling of the picture of the team. But you can kind of see even their point differential, plus 28, gotten some big wins. But I think the 49ers need to start putting shit together and like consistently winning games and beating those bad teams by a wide margin and beating some good teams. So I might even be too high on the 49ers here, and honestly I think I am. So they're definitely favoring moving back, but if they can keep winning games, they will stick around the top 10. So they're at number 9 at 4-4, right behind the Houston Texans, who don't move. Again, it was a close, barely win over the Colts, which I didn't think was impressive and worthy of them moving up ahead of this next team. So they kind of sit where they're at. You'll see, actually, I'll just go through these quick. My problem with the Texans this year is they just don't blow out these bad teams. And the other team has been in it till the end in like most of their wins so far. This is even the Bears is the other first one that came to mind, but seems like they're playing down to teams, and CJ Stroud has also shown that maybe Nico Collins is a good wide receiver, and everybody thought, oh, look at what this guy's doing with Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and nobody even knows who these people are, and he's such a good quarterback. I think he is still a good quarterback, but I think he's just showing that, not that I would hate to give the label overrated, but I just think the amazingness that everybody talked about in his rookie year, I think the people around him were underappreciated. So I think that's kind of showing this year. Their defense is still good. Their offense really isn't producing like you'd like, especially with the emergence of Joe Mixon being like probably the best player on their offense. So I got the Houston Texans, just a slight win over the Colts, barely move up. Right behind the Packers, we talked about them earlier, who get a slight, barely win over the Jaguars, who haven't really been good. Kind of the same type of vibe for me. You get a 3-point win over a team that really hasn't performed well, and in my opinion, with the Colts, didn't have their best roster in. And then the Packers barely get the win over the Jaguars here. So they don't move up much for me. Don't move up at all, really, in this case. Just, again, because of the teams around them. And that's kind of the same thing for the Washington Commanders, who they couldn't get into the end zone all game. They had 4 field goals until the clock hit 0. And so then that had been the most powerful, dominant part of their offense, was they were so good, but they kind of resorted. Their run game really wasn't great. I guess Jaden Daniels' running game was great, but it really came down to they would get a few first downs, get down the field, and then they'd sniff the red zone, and then the Bears would shut them down. And I don't know exactly why that was, but I felt like, just at least watching the game, it seemed like most of the game was Jaden Daniels running the ball and converting on these third downs and just getting first down, slowly, methodically getting down the field. But it only resulted in them getting 18 points, which again had been their kind of strong suit. And sure, their defense played well, but when it counted, they didn't. And they ended up pretty much letting up the game for a loss at the end until Jaden Daniels made this Hail Mary throw, which I think it's odd that he gets Player of the Week, considering how kind of poorly of a game he played. And they get the win kind of despite, his poor play, because him throwing up and getting the Hail Mary, it wasn't like an incredible throw by him. A Hail Mary, you're just throwing the ball as far as you can throw it. And it didn't even make it to the end zone. The only reason it went in was because Tyreek Stevenson was talking to a fan and then decided to tip it to Noah Brown there. So Washington Commanders do get a win, but not impressive really at all to me. And kind of an embarrassing win, probably one where they're like, yeah, we'll take that one in the win column, but I'm sure they're having a lot of talks about the negatives from that game this week. So I got them at 6, just kind of sitting where they're at, right behind the Ravens, who moved back 1 spot. You'd think maybe they should move back farther in a loss to the Browns, but the Ravens, it seems like all their wins are just like random fluke losses. They lost to the Browns, the Raiders, and can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but I don't know. I hate it. Like, when I look at it, I go 5-3 and they're the 5th ranked team. I think it's just because at their peak, like if we're getting like peak top tier Ravens, it seems like that's the case. And I think it would be easy, especially in another loss, for the Ravens to move back to like 9 or something. They could definitely jump back behind the Commanders, Packers, and Texans. But I couldn't move them out of that tier. Their offense is just dominant, and they were showed that they could be slowed down by this Browns team. But I think it was 1 week, so I don't want to overreact to 1 week. You could say, oh, well, it was the Raiders game too. But I just think with how they've been playing, I couldn't move them back that far yet. Now, if this becomes a consistent thing and there's more close games and more losses, then we can talk about moving them, to 9, 10, even possibly out of the top 10. But for now, they stay at 5 for me, only moving back 1 spot. Find the Vikings, who only moved back 1 spot in a pretty bad loss to the Rams. You'd think, oh, then maybe they should move back farther. But we think about, like, for me, my power rankings with the Saints were pretty high early on because of their first 2 weeks. And it did take them a few weeks to get back into the 20s, because we're like, well, but look at what we saw in those first 2 weeks. Now, the Vikings in this situation, it's like, look at the first 5 weeks and how seemingly perfect it was. And then now you have these 2, off weeks. It's just not enough for me to move them like super far back. It's going to be interesting to see how they play with a lot of divisional games coming up, being in the toughest division, but they only moved back the 1 spot for me. Still, maybe false hope. Now, I guess it wouldn't be hope because I don't want them to win. They're kind of a rival of the Bears, but I think it's just, it was 2 weeks. They've had 5 great, like, amazing weeks, 2 just kind of okay weeks. So I'm taking the Vikings at 4. But again, this is another team that definitely couldn't move back, especially if they keep falling backwards. But they're right behind the Bills, who, again, stomped the Seahawks, who have been a very hit or miss team. But like I've said, you have to kind of smash and dominate these good teams, or okay teams or bad teams if you can, and they do. So the Buffalo Bills with the second highest point differential in the league right now, and just showing that they can still be a good football team. They play good on defense, which, everybody was talking about how they lost everybody. They lost, Stephon Diggs on offense too. And what are they going to do? And Josh Allen just keeps slinging that thing on offense, making it happen, making it work. And then on the defensive side, I think they've been better than people anticipated. And so in a big win over the Seahawks, they move up 2 spots for me to number 3 at 6-2, right behind the Chiefs. Wow, the 7-0 team's at number 2. Yeah, well, about the other team, but the Chiefs have actually looked better this week, if we're being honest, over the Raiders. Again, too close of a game against the Raiders, in my opinion. But looked like, to me, they were just kind of producing a little bit more on offense, which I think is the upside, although Patrick Mahomes still hasn't done very well. I think their defense has been what's held them in it. Their defense is the reason that they're 7-0. But they just can't possibly be better than the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions, they just have been demolishing teams these past 3-4 weeks. And it doesn't seem like anybody can get in the way now. I think you can look at it and you can go, well, Jerry, they didn't really play many good defenses. And I would agree. I would say that, sure, you can put up, you also have to do it, though. You have to be able to put up 40, 50 points. And it's still impressive, even if you're playing against a bad defense. So I think we're really going to find out who they are when they have this, this whole NFC North plays most of their divisional games later in the season here. So I think that is going to be a bit of a gauntlet for them to get through. But if they can do it, they're going to stay at number 1, a plus 100, in only 7 games. Very impressive to have 100 points scored more than the other teams through only 7 games. So Detroit Lions at number 1, and then we'll go over the whole thing here. So looking at this, who do I have too high? I've kind of already talked about it a little bit. I think the Vikings and the Ravens definitely could move back. I think the Eagles could potentially move up. Seahawks, that was another team, with very few wins. I think it would be very easy right now to put those 2 teams ahead of the 49ers, move the 49ers back to 11. I could listen to that. I think the Bears, actually, I will say the Bears, I've seen some other power rankings. There's some Bears pages I follow that they'll only post where the Bears are ranked. And there's a lot of places that still have the Bears as like the 11th, 12th, 13th ranked team. So I'm seemingly a little low on the Bears, but I don't think so. I think that's a fair place to have them. I think in recent weeks, at least, and I guess you wouldn't be able to say this very well because of how well the Bears offense played a few weeks prior, but I've liked the growth, especially the recency bias between what Bo Nix has been doing on offense and how well the Broncos defense has played. I would say the Broncos and the Bears both have top defenses in the league. I think the Chargers would be another one. But then you kind of rank them by, well, I would say the Bears and the Broncos are almost comparable and towards the top on defense. I think the Chargers are up there too. I think it might be a little lower of a tier. And then you look at, you have to look at the offenses. And I think the highs have been higher, in my opinion, for the Bears in the couple weeks they've had, but the lows have also been lower. So that's what puts them behind the Broncos for me. And then I think I'm pretty happy with everything else. Obviously, a weird move to move the Bengals up and a pretty bad loss to the Eagles. But it's really mainly, I was talking about it earlier, because the Cowboys, the Colts both moved back. And I thought they were worthy of being ahead. Now, in retrospect, it would probably make sense to put the Rams ahead of them, but like the Rams also have not been very good. So, and I don't, do the Rams deserve to move up 3 from just beating the Vikings? I don't think so. So let me know what you think down below. Am I like crazy wrong about anything, or am I really right? Is this like really accurate? So that's going to be it. Thank you for watching and have a great day.